Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. As we've been talking about on our Instagram, today is the day that we interview Marc Brousse to talk about his work to promote Monochromos, which is a online exhibition that we'll be having very soon. Let me go ahead and see. Yep, he's right there. It's loading. Give everyone a second to get online, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the questions. Hi, Marc. How are you?
Fine.
Marc, we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the interview questions. But first, I want to say, as always, thank you so much for doing this and for participating in our Instagram live videos. And to everyone else who's listening, if you have any questions at all throughout the next 20 minutes or so, feel free to put a question down below, and I will go over whatever questions may show up at the end of the questions that we already have pre-written. All right, sound good?
That's fine.
So let's go ahead and get started. So Marc, we talked a little bit about this already, but you employ a skill that you call Trailism. And I was wondering if you could discuss a little bit, as you do in your artist statement, about what's significant about that technique and how it relates to Paul Claudel Cochard.
Yeah, the term Trailism has been attributed to Paul Claudel Cochard in the 90s. It's a French painter. So basically the technique is using color lines to create landscape, portrait, scene. So me, as an architect at first during my study and I practice, I made research on the history of line for architecture. How do we use the line to represent a specific space, an atmosphere, an idea? So based on that, I interweave the two principles and create a kind of like architectural language, like a music score. So the way I compose, I sequence, I read, I interrupt, identify the line, I can create a specific 3D illustration and try to put narration in it. So that's basically the principle.
Very cool.
So what is interesting, I can create, sorry, I can create a bridge between like abstract representation to figurative elements. So this interconnection is interesting to investigate, I think.
Of course. Yeah, and I think it's very interesting, the analogy that you just made, comparing your work and the fact that it's kind of like the sum of a ton of different elements, fine elements that all come together to make one whole piece, to an orchestra, because I do think that is really what you achieve in your pieces, is that you orchestrate an entire body of work rather than one specific thing. Talking a little bit about, and I think that element kind of relates to this question. Your work is often informed by urban settings and their architecture. And what fascinates me about that inspiration is how direct it is. We see that through history, cities and urban settings serve as a catalyst for artistic inspiration, but in a more implicit fashion. What about urban development do you think inspires you, and how does that inspiration relate to the ways in which urban settings foster artistic production in general?
Well, what's interesting in that in the urban setting, it's like every civilization, the culture arises from architecture and urban development. I call it urbatopia. Like utopian cities, like every civilization try to develop, is made out of creating a moral vision of the world. So then it's interesting to see how this has an impact on the human well-being, because we face everyday architecture because it's building our environment. So many architects try to develop like architecture and urban setting at different scale level using proportion of nature of humankind, like Le Corbusier, Palladio, for example. So it's interesting to look at that element and try to resituate the man within the city as an abstract global identity and elusive element. So I like trying to develop kind of allegories about history of architecture, because we learn from ancient time toward nowadays, because every cities have evolved for specific reason, personal, collective needs, social needs, economical needs. Why we change the type of architecture through techniques, and also the parameter of we call it beauty, for example.
Yeah.
So this is part of the different elements I try to bring in my artworks.
Yeah, of course. And I think one of the things that is also interesting, as you mentioned, is kind of like what you were talking about is almost like the cyclical relationship between the two things, that like the architecture and the spaces we live in serve a purpose for our culture, and our culture serves a purpose to influence that architecture as well. So as those two things develop in conjunction, they are constantly kind of like, it's like a back and forth
Yeah,
relationship between.
exactly.
Definitely. Kind of touching on that as well. We talked a little bit about epigenesis and the ways in which new construction projects have like a resounding effect on a general cityscape. Can you talk a little bit more about how that concept applies to your work, and how epigenesis plays out in urban culture, and what ways like it manifests within cities?
Okay, so basically the epigenesis, scientifically, the term means that like nature has been developed through a series of processes that like you have differentiation of cell that connect to each other to develop organ systems. So let's say like the epigenetic principle like permit to state that development it's the outcome of the underlying rules of a specific environment. So if you put that to you transfer that to urban development, urban settings, like every city is a unique species. It's a living organism. So every building you build adds something new and dynamic to the whole, to the global, to the soul of the urban configuration. You cannot see a building, I consider, that's my point of view, architecture as an isolated element. It has an impact on the context, and the context will respond to it in a good and a bad way. We don't have all the always the right answer as an architect or in urban development. So I think it's interesting to take that process and juxtapose it with the natural characteristic principle of epigenesis, and see which dynamic urban has to deal with its conquests with like the territory, the savage territory, for example. Why we don't use more like the natural grid to integrate it in the urban grids? So this kind of dialogue is interesting to develop and to illustrate. Indeed.
Um, I would say one of the things that I found resounded with me from our conversation was the fact that like it's such an intuitive thing, the reality that any one structure in an environment has a resounding effect on the other structures, but it's so common that it seems like architects and developers and the people that are creating such structures forget about that reality. You can see that in like even like the simplest. Personally, I live in New Orleans, which is a city that has a really historical architectural culture. And every once in a while you see a building and like the first thing you think is like, why did someone put that there? It looks nothing like the area around it. It is really like an eyesore. So I really do think that even though it's something that what you're talking about is something that applies to different worlds, you know, the natural world and organisms, it's something that very fittingly also applies to an urban space. Because of the fact that even though it is, people see it as something that's a separate entity, it is born out of the natural world because we ourselves as human beings are part of the natural world. And so to those people that would say that, you know, nature exists in one universe and urban settings exist in another, how would you respond to that, saying that those two things are a dichotomy?
So it gets at the end the connection. I didn't
Oh,
hear
I'm
the end
sorry
of the
about that.
question. Sorry.
Yeah, it happens. I recently had another Instagram live with another artist, and it just kept cutting out over and over again. So it's understandable, and our followers know how it is too. I was saying that to those people that view urban settings as one completely separate entity from the natural world, which you see as two very interrelated things, how would you answer to that kind of opinion that they're actually very separate?
Uh, I think like urban is really connected to like natural environments, and you cannot like make consider like it's the antithesis because some indeed some urban developments, let's say if you look at the history, you can take for example the philosopher and the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman would define three periods of like attitude of the man dealing with urban and environments. Like the first period is like the game warder. That's the man who is like taking care about nature and defending the balance and trying to comfort like the natural environment. So for example, you can take the troglodyte house, some Masada cities, or they don't distort the nature environment. They integrate it. The second period, like it's the modern period, would be like the period of the gardener, that the man start like organizing its space and controlling nature development for its own purpose. So you can have, for example, the Machu Picchu, for example, the Inca civilization, which is like making terrace. So they sculpt the nature for creating and feeding their own civilization, or like the Renaissance period, which is also a way of guiding the nature for its own purpose and needs. And the third period is, for example, like it's the contemporary, I would call it, would be like the hunter who kill until his carnier is full. That means he doesn't fear deregulation. So I will compare that to mega cities, and this like frenetic extension of like urban territory and the conquest of the grounds. Uh, that's, for example, also a scheme of Le Corbusier Plan Voisin back in the 50s. You have this kind of example of the position of nature is not a primary element. So I think when you look at the different schemes, we have something interesting to learn from different times. Even nowadays, there are good examples of urban development which are integrating nature as a primary element and give the rules, the guidelines, like for urban for the urban settings and the architectural developments. So I would say it's we need nature anyway. We copy at first, and the less we looked at it, the more we lose the concept of how to dwell within the city, because the city is part of nature anyway. So it's that's the way we should look at it, and mainly it's a way of warning people in my heart that not going back in the past, absolutely, but sometimes why we look at a whole building and we say this is really like poetic architecture because there are something relating to nature. Even like if you take some artistic style, Art Deco, Art Nouveau, which is we're copying with nature. Why it's more like pleasant to experiment in terms of light, space, like definition, because it relates to nature.
Of course. So we're going to take a bit of a pivot in our discussion, and I wanted to ask you a couple questions about your like artistic process. Specifically, what I wanted to first ask was, how do you think your education as an architect informs your work as an artist, and how significant that education is?
But I had the chance to travel a lot at first, and then it clearly defined my way of wishing to be an architect, and so I had the possibility, like as an architect, to integrate a lot of knowledge, because you need to give a correct answer for an architecture realization, to embrace many different realms like sociology, economic, politics, material, technique, science. So the more you grasp knowledge from the different realms, the more you're capable to have a correct and clear vision of what could be the right answer in that space for that moment, for that kind of civilization. So that is a way for me um, to make a interesting connection with my artistic reflection, because I can transmit more easily a message relating to that knowledge because I fit from history to I can switch history, sociology, and I can write on different topics. Then the architectural background is permit me to master the drawing and have this capability, is the term I think in English, like to switch from large scale to really small details. Like as an architect, when you conceive a building, you have the global volumetry, you look at the context when you insert the mass, and I switch directly in details. I go deeper and deeper to see how the smallest element in architecture could impact on the global shape. So in my drawing, I really integrate that principle. I start from the smallest detail to reconfigure a, a bigger perimeter and figurative elements. So this is really like feeding my heart, and then all the history of architecture meets civilization and like technical representation help me to create this language.
Of course. So, excitingly enough, you'll be collaborating with us shortly in an exhibition for Monochromos. And I know you're rather new to the camp, so I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about how you got in touch with us and how you started collaborating with the camp. So you could just share your journey with other people that are following.
But I would say join the camp, sign. Now, concretely, I think it's important, like for every artist or for every human being, try to get curious to art in general and the different arts, not only like drawing, painting, like all the arts. Uh, so my curiosity brought me on the other continent also, and I always search like artists and galleries that promote and express art that sensibly give a message, that tell a story, not only giving like the concept of beauty. That's okay. It likes really subjective, but I like when art can we can tell a story. There is something narrative. So the camp has this type of artists. So I start following them, and I met Melanie during the lockdown. We exchange a little, and we connect quite quickly on the like humankind level and artistic level as well. So we decided, I proposed her to maybe to collaborate. She saw my work and she appreciated the artistic reflection. We debate, and then we engage an artistic chapter with the camp. So
Yeah, of course. And we're so happy to have you
that's
have the opportunity to show your work. So we really appreciate
exactly.
behalf of everyone at the camp. Um, I think that's pretty much all the questions we have for you. I'm going to do a quick check to see if there are. Seems like all the questions that were asked we already pretty much touched on. Um, but yeah, so thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We really appreciate it when artists spend some time to talk on Instagram Live and discuss their artwork and their participation in the camp. So it really means a lot.
Thank you to you. So very pleasant to share sometimes, and I'm always, let's say, open to engage artistic debates. Try to.
Of course. You want to let everyone know where they can follow you on Instagram or social media, just since they're all watching.
With pleasure. If anyone has like a question, want to discover more, like my artistic universe and the technique of Trailism and the beauty of the architecture in the world, go see. And you can go my website also. You have videos that I made. That is, I think, interesting to understand the process. And you can follow me on Instagram. Okay.
It's
Or
Marc Brousse, right?
sorry.
It's Marc underscore Brousse, correct?
Indeed, yeah. Really French name. Sorry. Like
Yes.
the bush in English. Sorry, that's not a good reference.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Marc, and have an excellent rest of your night. Appreciate you
Thank
taking.
you.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Yes, bye bye.